this, but then there's some ambiguity. Dr. Bruce Lipton speaks about this, epigenetics in particular. He's like one of the godfathers in this space. He talks about the notion of genetics loads the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. So what does that mean?
Genetics loads the gun?
Genetics loads the gun and the environment pulls the trigger.
Okay. Yeah.
So in the epidemic that we're talking about right now, that I say we've got a feeling problem, activation, secure attachment, all this stuff that we've spoken to, is coming from our parents, their parents, their parents, grandparents. That's where it's stemming from. We've got a generational trauma cycle that is now rearing its head massively. Why? Because the wars that occurred, the famines that were occurring, back 100 years ago, they didn't have time to process emotions. When therapy...
dude, I talk about this all the time. I say, man, like life has gotten good recently. Do you know what I mean?
Even when therapy was created and designed, it was designed to help women stay in their relationships and just manage what was going on, not to leave relationships.
How old is therapy, the whole...
Good question. I can't remember the year, but I think it was...
It wouldn't be that old.
Early 1900, like 1920, 30.
Which is not that old.
Not that old, no.
Yeah.
No, but it was merely designed to keep families together, to keep women in that kind of dynamic. And so the genetic sides of things is that there is predispositions if your parents... There's two parts. There's one of what your parents experienced, yeah? So if dad and his grandpa were always under stress, their nervous systems are activated, they're running high cortisol, that's going to change the way they show up, and it's going to change how they eat, what they eat, how they sleep. So it's going to affect their sperm count, the cells, and all those kinds of things. So it's going to influence stuff, yeah?
Yeah, which makes sense. If you think about humans as organisms, you're going to see the flow-on effect.
Correct. So the bloodline, if you will, starts to be activated in a particular way. Now, it doesn't mean that a baby, if your parents were in war and you're born, like there's no more war. If there's war while you're being born and you're in the womb, then it's more aggressive. Yeah, because you're in the womb, mum's stressed, her nervous system is activated, and that's getting filtered through the umbilical cord.
Yeah.
You're getting all of that. We're already, as a baby in the womb, predicting what's going on in the environment. Now, when we're in our father's sack, it's another case, right? It's like, well, he's got his stuff going on. Doesn't mean that if he was responsive to loud noises at you being born in this environment today in Melbourne, Australia, that you're going to be affected by loud noises. Not necessarily. Doesn't mean that. But what's likely going to occur is that if as a child you start to find yourself in environments that are chaotic and whatnot, it will activate certain genes and cells in your system that have already been there, that would have potentially been dormant. Now they're being woken up because generationally this is a common theme that was occurring. So this is where Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about it, and it probably says it in, what was the book that you mentioned? It wasn't your fault.
It doesn't start with you.
It doesn't start with you. Yeah. Is that whole notion of, in some of the work that I do, it's like a question of, if you've got some trauma, there's a question that I ask them. It's like, was this after birth? There's a question that we ask them to go in their conscious, unconscious mind. Was it after birth, during birth, or before?
Who did people say before?
Yeah, because they're tapped in. They're like in a deep hypnosis of of reflect of like, shit, did this happen? When did this happen? And not all the time, but some of the time people will say, this is before time. Like I'm carrying something that my mother carried, that her mother carried, that,
That's
and
insane.
It's insane because then they might go and ask their mum, hey, your mother or your grandmother, do you remember much about her? Because they'll get a download of something that has been genetically passed down that they're actually experiencing right now. Very common in Indigenous, very common in the Israeli, with Auschwitz and all that took place, where people that are doing trauma now, they're actually shedding the things that occurred way back.
But their grandparents or great-grandparents went through.
Correct. Yep.
That's insane, man. Isn't that insane? Like,
it's crazy, man. It is crazy. But we're all energetic beings. We're made up of cells. We're made up of positive and negative. We're made up of cells. A cell has both positive and negative. So that's why I used that example earlier about things could be worse, things could be bad. Yeah. That's the duality. That's the polarity of life, that there is an equal opposite of a negative and a positive every single time. That's how the universe works. We have to be always in balance. That's why there's as much bad happening as much quote unquote good happening.
Don't you think everyone has some level of trauma?
100%. Just being born is a traumatic event. Even if your mother was really calm, kind, the whole dynamic at home was beautiful. Your father was very loving and supporting and nurturing, and he was emotionally available. Back in our day, like back when we were kids, it was very rare, right? Coming out of the womb, whether it's getting cut open or through, the canal, that's an experience in itself. First air.
Yeah. Go from being inside a womb covered in liquid to taking your first breath.
I have another question.
Go for
So
it.
it's pretty much for the listeners, because most of them might have not read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. So you were talking about child trauma. And there is a section about a child who draws his experience from 9/11. Do you remember that?
A child who what?
A child who draws a picture of from 9/11, his experience.
Yeah.
So what he draws is that he draws a mattress outside the window of the 9/11 building.
Yeah.
So what he says oh, my parents will put a mattress underneath there. And he didn't had any trauma about the event because the parents were his security.
So is that referring to the people jumping out of the building and
putting a mattress there.
so that
Yeah, so the child
Yeah.
did experience the 9/11 event. But
He was alive during the event, from
yeah,
memory.
I think so that's after
it was a
the
few
event.
years later.
Yeah. So he draws this photo, this picture.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about that, and how does it connect to the dots?
Sure. Well, I can't remember the exact details of the book. It's ages ago since I read the book, but from memory, or the context of that is that whilst we may not experience significant trauma in our home growing up, like it can, there's secure attachment, our parents are available, there's steadiness, there's groundedness and all that kind of jazz, we've still got society. Like we've got, even when I drive my kids to school, sometimes and the radio turns on, I usually don't have any music on or any radio on. Sometimes I'll put some music on for them. When I hit the radio on, there's and reports last night in Melbourne, there was a fatal stabbing, and this is 8 o'clock in the morning. So they're hearing that. Same as they're hearing what's going on in Palestine and stuff right now, or Ukraine, and they're asking questions like, "Oh, Dad, what's going on here?
why are they killing people?"
That's putting an imprint on them. So, in the context of that boy who didn't have a direct involvement, the whole world was talking about it. He would have heard it in conversations.
I think I have to make it clear a little bit. So the context is that the child did experience the 9/11 event.
Okay.
So what happened is that he actually didn't get any trauma out of it because the parents were his security.
Sure.
Which shows that
Yep.
for young children, the parents can either be a blessing or a curse.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to
Yep.
get an answer from the side of a blessing, because you did talk about how if a parent hits a child, the child
Correct.
jumps back into the survival mode.
Correct.
Okay,
gotcha. Yeah. Okay, nice. So, yes. Okay, so the whole goal, remember, was secure attachment. The fight between authenticity and secure attachment. So a child who's got secure attachment by his parents or her parents has the capacity to authentically discover themselves. In that narrative, I'm going to go back and actually have a look at it, and I'll flick you guys an email on my thoughts or a video. Is, you can have the dynamic of two siblings growing up in the same environment at home, and one turns out to be a successful business person, family and whatnot, and one turns out to be a drug addict, as an example, and ends up in prison.
There's a great story about that.
Yeah, there's quite a few. You use this example, and it's well, what's the difference? They both experience the same thing, right? Growing up, similar. First thing is that they both didn't experience the same parenting, because we've got this conception that you grew up in a home that if you and I are brothers, Robby, it's our father or our mother parents us exactly the same way.
And
they
they don't.
actually don't.
Yeah.
Every parent, so I've got 3 children, they both have 3 different mothers and 3 different fathers. So that's the first thing. They get parented slightly different, even though at times I don't want to admit it, The tone is different here. The punishment may be a little bit different there. The connection shifts.
Yeah, but it would be weird if you spoke, because they're different humans.
Correct.
And
correct.
it'd be weird if you spoke to them
Yeah.
all in the exact same way.
Well, but here's the problem though. Growing up, a lot of people are like, oh, Thing was the golden child, or you took care of, sister more, not me. And parents that can't see that will deny it. No. We loved you the same. We treated you the same. Whereas when my son says it to me, Dad, you take care of Orlando differently and he doesn't get in trouble as much and whatever. I was like, yeah, you're right, son. I said, you guys do experience different versions of us and that must be really hard for you. So I validate and I acknowledge that. And then all of a sudden it doesn't become a thing for him anymore. But coming back to the drawing, so in that scenario, what could be true is that the child's interpretation of the events was nothing really bad happened because the parents didn't have the energy of this is really, really bad. They kept it secure, they kept it tight. But on the flip side of it, I'd love to know how old that child is now and whether there's been any repercussions, because what can occur and what does occur in situations where there is trauma is that we bypass. And bypassing is we create a fantasy of what we think it should look like, what it could be. We create a narrative, like as an example, in so many of the clients that I've worked with that say, oh, look, my parents weren't that bad. My parents weren't bad. Well, I don't remember much of my childhood. It was pretty good. And then when we start to unpack, there's some significant events that have taken place that they've chosen to either forget, bypass because they couldn't process it. So that could be potentially what's occurring there. It's either the parents were very emotionally available, understood the assignment, created a secure line where that child felt nurtured, but the fact that there's a drawing of a mattress, for me, is a slight indication of potential bypass in there.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense as well. Because even if you could get all of that right and still having a traumatic experience like that, which the parents could have done everything right and the kids still could have reacted differently. Do you know what I mean? But it sounds like, I would lean more towards that in the sense of they have not processed it in the correct way.
Yep.
They've bypassed it.
Yeah.
And one day they may unpack it, or they may not. They may live with whatever beliefs that they've come from that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And most people do that, right?
Yeah. The question is, which one is the healthier one at the time? It's like, well, the mattress drawing is less chaotic. So if there's some bypassing in there, right now. But if the child has witnessed everything and heard it and was at school and everyone's still talking about it and the kid says, oh, but people jumped out and it's like, oh, shit, what is this? Like my interpretation wasn't actually that bad, We just don't know. But eventually we find out. That's a thing.
Yeah,
eventually
most of the time. Most of the time it ends up coming back to haunt you in one way or another.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting conversation, man.
This has been great.
I have more.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click just over here. Or if you want to watch the full episode, you can click over here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.